Hi, I'm Tom Eschen, and this is Power in Politics, the award-winning podcast and segment with the officials, the advocates, the members of the community that are calling for change and holding them accountable along the way, too. Today, we sit with Eva Bass, who is a member of the community in Albany, a voice in that. She's the president and the founder of Bridge the Gap, an organization that helps fill some of those gaps. And her appearance comes just a few days after Albany Police, the mayor, released statistics saying crime was down. They held a press conference about it. Her organization, a couple of days later, said that saddened them, disappointed them, because they say the perception is not that crime is down. Instead, it's the opposite right now. So we get deeper into that and some of the solutions she says are needed, some of the things she wants the officials to do to help rectify that perception right now in the city of Albany. Eva Bass has joined us now. She's the founder and president of Bridge the Gap Resource and Outreach Incorporated in Albany. Eva, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
As we've been talking about, this is a pivotal time in Albany. We have a big election in a couple of weeks, and there's going to be some changes in the city. And this does root back to, you sent out a release yesterday from your organization in response to the press conference Albany Police had. They had the release about the crime statistics, which have gone down from year to year at this point. You're saying that you were deeply saddened by that press release claiming that the violence had decreased. Yes. Why did you say that?
Well, of course, some of the numbers went down, so I'm not calling anybody a liar about that. Yeah. But the lived experience of the community members in the city of Albany and other disenfranchised neighborhoods, the crime is up. The uptick in the unsafety of women, children, and just being in your own home is just not safe anymore.
And you lived in Albany for a long time, right?
Yes, yeah. I lived in Albany since my whole life, but I grew up in foster care. So I grew up around the whole capital region, but most of my life in the city of Albany.
Now, we talk a lot with the Albany Police, the mayor, and we've had Chief Cox here, and he does talk about perception and how much of a weight that is and how much of a battle that is for the police. Why is that perception to you? You just mentioned some of those factors, but why do you think the perception is still that violence is an issue in Albany?
The perception is, number one, people see on the media, people see firsthand, people hear when shootings happen, I think people just have that perception that Albany is just this horrible place, which is it's not, but it has so many issues. It has a lot of violence in our neighborhoods. Some are reported and some are not. So we have to look at that.
Yeah, and you look at, you think about the decreases that they have been talking about over the course of the last, you can even say a couple years now, but pre-pandemic, they are still above those levels. 2019, you look at even the murders, there was 4 murders reported in Albany in 2019. There was 13 last year in 2024. Do you think that's a factor to this too, that maybe 10 years ago things felt different and that these numbers aren't moving the needle enough to get that feeling to change?
I think that's absolutely true. I don't think that we should really champion too much that we're going back to the normal of an uptick of violence, but I think that we need to focus on the individual neighborhoods and addressing the true needs that are causing the violence.
Yeah, we know the chief has spoken a lot about community policing. They've had different meetings. What has that done for you?
Community policing, I've been involved directly and indirectly, and I know it has a lot of improvement that needs to happen, but I also know Chief Cox coming back, he champions community policing, so he's bringing a different perspective to the city of Albany, which I appreciate. I just want to make sure it's laser focused on the true needs of the community.
What are those right now?
The true needs of the community are mental health, housing disparities, food disparities, and connecting to resources that will really help them thrive.
Where does your organization, at least Bridge the Gap, come into that fold?
So Bridge the Gap, we focus on mentorship, entrepreneurship development, and emergency food assistance, but we also collaborate with multiple organizations and initiatives in the city to make sure we maximize the positive impact in our community.
Yeah, what kind of impact do you want that to be? You mentioned a positive one. What kind of gaps do you hope to fill, and have you been filling?
The gaps that I would hope to fill, and we have been filling, is to be able to create opportunity for our young people to have access to resources, access to programs, and access to social emotional support, which is very, very important, especially after COVID-19.
Yeah. Are organizations like yours getting enough support from officials, from the city in general?
I don't know about from the city. I've never experienced any financial supports from the city. I know that in New York State has been creating initiatives and giving some funding sources like Project Rise and some other funding sources that are coming available. But is it enough? No. What we all know, a couple $1 million is only going to go so far, especially with inflation. So I love to start, but I hope that we can really create more funding streams to support and sustain these programs.
What has been your message to the officials? Like, what are the steps that should be taken at this point?
Well, the first step is to make sure that you hear true voices of the community members, not just the community members who have the luxury of knowing when there's public forums and things of that nature, but really walking your neighborhoods, sitting on stoops, and coming to work with nonprofits, not just like my own, but Bridge the Gap in a village that really work with direct community members that don't have the privilege of always being at the forefront of these conversations.
The other day, Monday, they had their press conference, Albany Police and the mayor, to talk about some of these numbers that we're discussing here. And the chief mentioned pop-up barbecues that they put on. And you hesitate as I mentioned that as something that they say, well, it's something that we try to do to make people feel better after a shooting or things like that. Do you think something like that works? Does that make a difference?
I mean, I think it puts a Band-Aid on things, but I do appreciate the effort. I do appreciate, connecting our community police officers to the direct community, but we definitely have to do a lot more than just giving hamburgers and hot dogs. And, speaking to the police chief, I am going to say, he did say that he had plans to work on some things.
Yeah. What, I guess, from his messaging do you think that would help? Because he has come on after he was here initially, and tried to have a much more front-facing, I guess you could say, visual of him being out front of it. Do you think that matters when it comes to this?
I think it does matter. I think it's very important to have a police chief that understands the importance of mental health and he understands of building relationships. And I think that is something that he brings to the table. And from my experience this far, it has been really positive with Chief Cox. But the issues in the city of Albany have been pre-existing, and in his absence, it hasn't been going too well.
You mentioned that the mental health aspect of things, and you had the mayor on Monday say we don't, and she said this before, not just be on Monday, you got to look here, it's not a crime crisis, it's a healthcare crisis. Do you agree with that? What's going on in Albany? It's not a crime crisis, it's a healthcare crisis.
A healthcare crisis? No. I think that it is a public health crisis. And hopefully that's what she meant. Because it's the mental health, it's the food disparities, it's all of the things centered around the social terms of health. Because we have to stop being reactionary and we have to really look at the root causes of violence and what is causing people to pick up a gun, a knife, fight, or hit somebody with a car.
What, from the conversations you've had, you've said even kids, talk about this. What are they feeling? I guess why do they think this is happening, and what do they think some of the options are?
Well, 2 outreach sessions that I had with the youth. So I had an outreach session over the springtime at Giffen, and the youth were talking about the drugs, the homelessness, people shooting up in the backyard, not feeling safe to go to the corner store, not understanding why there's all of these things going on and you see needles on the ground when you're going to school. And then just a little while ago, I think about 2 weeks ago, I had an event with youth. It was called YN to Gentlemen, and we had a building full of youth, and they really talked about mental health, that they need mental health in the school, they need it available for their parents, and they need outlets. And so that's what we really need to provide.
Is that programming? I guess what are some of the bridges to that, for them? Or is it, social media? Obviously, I'm sure that's having an impact, and you mentioned their parents. There's probably a lot of different factors there.
There
right?
are. There's so many bridges,
Yeah.
Right? So there's no one solution for one person or one group of people. We have to have multiple outlets, multiple organizations, multiple resources. But those resources, organizations, and outlets need to refine our direction and how we collaborate and how we communicate to make sure that we're kind of triaging and taking care of the community as they're getting services
Because you have macro issues and micro issues here.
at the same time.
Right? Because I think you spoke to some of the quality of life concerns when needles on the ground, you have blight, you have vacant buildings. Those are things that are very structural, right? Or I guess they're very like, okay, can you put money into that? Or do you have like you said, you have maybe an offshoot of the city that's now tackling these things? I just spoke yesterday to the Historic Albany Foundation. They have buildings, they have a list of endangered buildings that they think need to be addressed and could be, even for an economic benefit.
Right.
So like that's one aspect, right? I guess how do you, so if you start there, I mean, do you think that can help propel systemic change?
It's a start. So
Yeah.
those are the symptoms and those are the adverse effects of the root cause.
Yeah.
The root cause is a systemic issue, right? And we have to change our systems and we have to be able to create laws and legislations that are going to support that. And so when you're dealing with oppression, on oppression of a people, redlining and all of these things, we have to really address those things. At the same time, we're triaging and helping people heal from the trauma that was caused from systemic racism.
When it comes to those laws and the systemic issues that go back decades, centuries, right? I mean, it goes back for a long time.
Forever and ever.
Is the state doing enough to adjust to that? Because we look at what happened in 2019. You had some of those things that were meant to do so when it comes to justice reform, with the raise the age laws and the bail reform to try to keep families together, right? And kids out of jail with people that were much older than them. You know, they've rolled that back in recent years. Is it that, or is it even beyond that in terms of systemic change here to try and create that, which is more of a long term, right? That's to help people 10, 20 years down the road.
Right.
What does that look like to you?
Well, I'm going to say that New York State has been doing a lot in the last couple years, and we have been a part of some of those things. Yeah. They have been working with organizations like ours to do like real listening sessions and really trying to figure out what the community's real issues are, instead of just going from word of mouth that some committee done, voted to say this what it was. They've also been investing in programs like Project Rise, that's a violence prevention that has been not only helping the city of Albany, but now helps multiple neighborhoods in the capital region. And, I hear all the time. Yesterday, I was at the Capitol, and, they were talking about more programs that they're working on. Of course, we have what's going on in Washington, D.C. that is kind of holding us back or trying to hinder that progress. But I would say New York State in a whole has been going in the right direction.
You look at, and which goes back to public safety and that perception, right, of what are the options I could have, right, as a young person or even as an older person too, right? Probably it impacts, we talked a lot about the children there, but adults too are impacted
our seniors.
By this. Yeah.
Our seniors are feeling it. I mean, Kathy Sheehan, she was a little bit on point about the health care because the access to pharmaceuticals, the access to proper care, but that's a lot more deeper than just health care. It's the access to resources, transportation, food. Our seniors are not eating, they don't have ways to get to the grocery store or even are able to stand sometimes to cook their food so they can get nutritious food. So, we just have to really work harder on addressing those things at the same time as we're doing the legislations and policies.
You speak to that, and then, of course, you got the big chunk of money that's supposed to be coming to Albany at some point here. And as we talked about off camera, we know that it's going to be a consultant that is going to really, at the state level, that they're going to contract out to see where some of these issues are. And obviously, you're speaking to some of them now. If you had a message for that consultant, what would you say?
My message to that consultant is make sure that you understand the community that is impacted from this project before proceeding and making any decisions or any allocations, because the community that the 787 is really impacting has been the most disenfranchised community in the city of Albany, and is still dealing with the effects from the build of 787 in the Empire State Plaza.
You've been very involved in that.
Yes,
787.
I have.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, through my hat under A Village as executive director, we're a part of a group called Reimagine Albany, which is multiple groups like Clean and Healthy, not YMCA, Capital Area Urban League, NAACP, Radix, please, I don't want to miss anybody. But, we are working towards making sure the community's voice is amplified, but at the same time that the community is protected from development that is going to hurt them, instead of help them thrive and become better.
Is there one proposal, 787, you like better than the others?
No, there's not.
Do you like any of them?
Not necessarily. Some I would take some out, but it's really not about me. It's really about what the community wants and how it would affect the direct community. That's what I want.
And I think a lot of people, the reason this is all happening is because there needs to be a change here, like you said.
Yeah. Well, the reason why 787 is because it's falling apart and it needs to be repaired.
Yes.
And the repair is going to be just as much, or if not more, than it would cost to just, reconstruct it to make sure it works for the neighborhood.
Yeah, if people don't know, Syracuse went through a similar process. Albany's a little bit behind, I guess, Syracuse in that with I-81. When I worked in Syracuse, I reported on it.
Yes.
I remember standing under a bridge in 2013 saying this bridge is at the end of its lifespan in 2017. It's 2024. They're finally working on it now. So this is a very long range. That's the point I'm trying to make here in Albany.
Yeah,
now.
This is like a 20, hopefully not 30-year project. This is my grandson is going to reap the benefits of this project.
Right. I think that's a lot to get what we're talking about here. So you go back to that funding, the $400 million for Albany. Of course, the museum's involved in there and all that too. But where do you think that money goes the farthest, the longest?
Where it should go or where it's going?
Where you think it should go? This
is
your forum.
Right. Well, I definitely think that the money should make sure it goes to reinvested in our communities. Yes, making sure we're supporting businesses so we can have more economic growth. That is most important. But making sure Black-owned businesses are properly supported and thriving, because our communities, these are disenfranchised communities that are really comprised of mostly Black and brown people. If we're not making the money and pouring back into our community, we're going to continue to fall apart. So hopefully that is one thing. But also with the money that's going to DOT, I would hope that they would take a portion of that and invest it in the Reimagine Albany project so we can continue to have community engagement and community participation as we're, doing this long project.
Do you feel listened to? You speak a lot about community engagement. Do you think it's more of a volume thing in that aspect of we need more than one public hearing? We need more than one conversation with city officials. Does that matter, that the amount of times you get to have a touch point with them?
No, because I know I can show up to your office, but the everyday community member doesn't have that, ability or know they have that ability. And so I think that what's most important is having that engagement with the community and kind of being that conduit to change so that when we do connect to these public officials, we can give true feedback from the community that would allow them to hopefully steer their decisions towards the community's direct needs.
And I think as you speak to the awareness of this, I spoke with the chair of the Reparations Commission just a few weeks ago now about the public aspect of that and how they're going to make their decisions on what reparations mean depending on those interactions. Because I was talking to her and Dr. Hawkins, and she was saying, and I was saying how a lot of times, people after a decision's made, people are like, well, I didn't get a chance to have any input. She goes, well, we've had these opportunities. People just don't know, there's not enough, like you said, and that speaks to the funding of being able to say, let's do more of this engagement, right? Of being able to actually connect and touch people that way.
Yeah, the access to these opportunities. I find myself very privileged to be able to know. I get emails, I get text messages. I personally know the mayor, the chief, the auditor. I know, our county exec. Regardless of, the level of the relationship at the time, right. I can give them a call. I could call my, common council member or my legislator or Pat Fahey or somebody on the phone, regardless of what time it is. Yeah. Everybody doesn't have that privilege. So we have to make sure that we're basically bridging that gap. And it looks like having trusted messengers, advocates, but also our elected officials need to be very much intentional about connecting to the direct community, not the more privileged community that is able to amplify their voices.
Yeah, and we were speaking a little while ago. You're not the only one doing this either.
Oh,
I think it's important, not that that anything's wrong with that, but I'm saying at the same time, you were just saying there's others that are working really hard, maybe behind the scenes.
Right.
Right.
There are so many organizations I work with, and I can name them off, and I don't want to forget anyone.
Okay.
Right. But all of the collaboratives that I'm a part of, we have the SECC, the South End Community Collaborative, that is comprised of so many organizations working towards positive change, positive solutions on a service organization level. We have Project Rise, we have Reimagine Albany. We have the Albany Together project, which was defunded, unfortunately, but still progressing. So there are numerous efforts, not only in the city of Albany, but around the region, that are fighting for positive change and doing just that.
Is there a neighborhood you'd start with in Albany? I know you said you moved around a little bit.
Yeah, I would start with the South End.
Yeah.
I would definitely start with the South End. I mean, I know the South End, North Albany, Arbor Hill, West Hill, and Sheridan Hollow. And now, I'm going to be honest with you, Pine Hills is starting to kind of, is trickling over. And so, we need to look at all of our red line neighborhoods, but the South End is definitely the most disinvested.
June 28th, is that right? You have an event coming up?
Yes, I do.
Tell us about it.
June 28th, rain date June 29th. We have our 12th annual Peace March and Stop the Violence rally, where we are going to be standing against all violence at a peaceful march with the community. We ask people to come out. We're going to be, having conversations, talking, meeting people, and most definitely connecting people to resources so that they can kind of help mitigate violence in our community.
That's great. Finally, I did want to ask about you.
Yes.
What is your motivation here?
My motivation?
Yeah. Why?
I just God. I am definitely a disciple of God, and this is the direction. I am a normal, you believe it or not, I am just a cook, like a chef. Like, I thought I would be running a big restaurant by now in my life, but, my life has been full of disparity. I grew up in the system through foster care, mental health, family with drug addiction, just so many things. I want to use my lived experience and my trauma, and within my healing, I want to help heal my community. So that's really my motivation.
What's it meant to you to be able to do that at this level? I mean, you just said the connections you've been able to procure, in your work. What's it meant for you to be this voice and this example for others?
It means a lot to me, and I just always check myself every morning to make sure I'm a good steward of being a proper advocate for my community. So I try to be as selfless as possible, in making sure that I don't look at what I think, what I feel, what I think I want. I always look at what the community says and what the community wants, and I use my skills to be able to help mitigate that and, create positive solutions.
Great. Eva, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming in.
Oh, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can stay up to date on these news-making conversations about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most: power and politics.